This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 429, the Drupal Association Board. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. On today's show, we are talking about the Drupal Association Board, its strategic initiatives, and the future of Drupal with guest Baddý Sonja Breidert. We'll also cover Advent Calendar as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Baddý. She's the co-founder of 1x Internet, a European Drupal agency with offices in Germany, Iceland, and Spain. She has been on the board of directors for the Drupal Association for the past 6 years, reaching her term limit of 2 times 3 years, and is now part of the executive committee as past chair. Baddý is Icelandic and has a degree in computer science and engineering, and has been working with Drupal since 2007. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Nick Lapham, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-hosts are Ron Northcutt, head of DevRel at AppSmith. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks.
And joining us as usual, John Picozzi, solutions architect at EPAM.
Hello, everyone.
All right, now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted to reveal content a day at a time in an interactive Advent calendar? There's a module for that. It's called Advent Calendar, and it was created less than a month ago in November 2023 by listener James Shields, whose Drupal.org username is Lost Car Park. It has a 1.0.0 beta 3 release, which works with Drupal 10.1 and newer, and it is actively maintained. In fact, that latest release was made earlier today. It does have some test coverage, and it has 5 open issues, 3 of which are bugs, but all but one of those issues are now marked as fixed as of the latest release. It does have officially 6 sites using the module today, and so as some background, James had originally created a Drupal Advent calendar a year ago and shared it in the Talking Drupal channel in Drupal Slack and on his website which is lostcarpark.com. Now, the idea was to showcase a new module every day, similar to Advent calendars that provide a chocolate or a toy each day hidden behind a cardboard door. James's initial vision displayed the content in a traditional calendar format using the calendar view module. And what he really wanted, though, was a way to present the content using clickable doors to reveal new entries. So this year, he created the new Advent Calendar module to provide a view display, which you can configure to display which content you want to use and other filters to apply, as well as use fields to configure what information will be shown. The module uses a single directory component for display, hence the 10.1 requirement. There's also an Advent Calendar Quick Start submodule that will set everything up for you, including a content type view and 24 nodes populated for you to get started. Each site visitor gets to open the door to new content as it is published each day. So for authenticated users, which doors have been opened is stored as user data, and for anonymous users, that's kept in local storage via JavaScript. Now, in addition to this being an interesting module in its own right, the Advent Calendar James has created this year is also a community effort. He's managed to enlist a wide variety of contributors to write about modules or aspects of the Drupal community that they're passionate about. So it's a great way to up your Drupal game. You can open a new door yourself every day at lostcarpark.com/Advent Calendar 2023 with hyphens between Advent Calendar and 2023. So let's talk about the Advent Calendar module.
So interestingly enough, I had gone to the Advent Calendar site and I was like, looking at it. And then I went to James's profile and I was looking at that and I was like, oh, there's an Advent Calendar module. And I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. And then I was like, I just started spiraling. I was like, oh man, I'm going to set this up next year for my kids. Like, this is going to be great. So that is definitely very cool. And I think it could get more use. It could have a number of different great possibilities.
Go ahead, Ron.
I was just going to say, at our house, we usually do an Advent every year just for funsies. But as the kids have gotten older, in order to kind of make it more interesting, what they've tended to do is start to make it like a puzzle. So someone will take a day and they'll write a riddle, and then if you go to wherever the place is, there'll be another riddle to go to some place. So you have to like follow the trail to figure out, like it's a whole game they play. This would actually work out really well for something like that, because you could kick off everything from there, and you could also set up each node, give them that authorship so they can have control over how to start or whatever they're trying to do, and no one else would be able to see it. So I might have to join you in doing this next year as well, John.
That's super interesting. I like the idea of like the authorship thing. As a side note, Nick, you may be interested to know that our Advent calendar this year is Marvel Lego, or Lego Marvel.
Oh, cool.
Right.
My son was very happy to get Spider-Man in his sweater. Could be considered an ugly sweater, but I don't think it's that ugly. So very interesting.
In kind of a meta, approach that James had taken, actually day 3 of his calendar this year is actually a write-up about the Advent calendar as well. So if you're interested in sort of reading his perspective on there, you can also check that out on his website.
And you can follow John
Cool.
in his spiral into the Advent calendar wormhole. Nice.
Yeah, I have to say this, the amount of effort that James puts into this is pretty impressive. I mean, last year, I have no idea how he wrote this whole thing himself, because I imagine it's a significant amount of effort just to corral 24 authors. But I think it's definitely something that's a lot of fun. And I feel like the module itself, at first blush, feels like one of those kind of novelty modules, right? Like Snow that we used to have. But as you dig into it, like there's other applications for it to show like gated content day to day, even if it's not an Advent calendar. So I could see it becoming a more fleshed out thing as well. And then it's also useful for things like what John was saying, or Ron, if you want to set up something for your own kids or your own family, it's nice to have a module that provides a lot of that infrastructure. So yeah, it's definitely a cool project.
I think it'd be pretty fun if some of the sites that are using this would, actually share with James some of the ways that it's being used, because it'd be just really interesting to see different ways that people are using it. So hopefully those people reach out and share that.
Yeah, and Nick, you were just saying about some of those different ways, and it suddenly reminded me of you see this pattern all the time where you'll have somebody like sign up to a mailing list, and like for 30 days you're going to get something every day, like it's it's an educational thing or it's a lead generation thing or whatever. You could use this for that as well, and so you're not having to rely on email, having to rely on sending an email necessarily, and then getting people to come back every day, which is great for views on your site or your app. It's an interesting use case.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you, Martin. And if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
On Drupal.org or various social platforms, they can find me as @manclue.
Awesome. See you next week.
See you.
Now on to our primary topic. So Baddý, you're a former board member. Can you tell us a little bit about your time on the board? Because it sounds like you were there for 6 years.
Forever. Yeah. Hey, so first of all, thank you all for talking Drupal and making this happen here, because this is so important for us and for the community and for the conversations, and even probably will fit into many of the things that I'm going to be talking about, of how to get good word about Drupal. So thank you, all of you involved here. Yeah. So 6 years ago, I was probably a little bit angry European Drupal community member at some of the decisions that were being made at the Drupal Association when the DrupalCon was not supposed to happen in 2018. And I probably was together with a lot of other European members who said, that's not okay. You cannot just skip a conference. And, then they were like, yeah, it's only a pause. And then I got a lot involved in the Drupal Association, and I saw hey, they actually also just need help. So I started to, instead of just being the one that is angry and saying that things need to be done differently, what we did in Europe, we did actually DrupalCon, we did do the Drupal Europe 2018. in Germany. And that was just a group of European community members. And then off from that moment, I actually was invited to be part of the board. And I can talk about that process per se, if you're interested in that, how that works. We can talk about it later,
Sure.
maybe. So that is like, we start there, and like 6 years ago, everything was different from it is now, right? We were just coming out of like a pretty financial difficulties. And that was one of the reasons why DrupalCon in Europe was cancelled for that 1
Okay.
year. It's because there were actually, like, we were losing money. And normally Drupal Association has been earns its money from the DrupalCon. And then we were having this amazing event in North America that like gave a lot of revenue, so we could actually fund the engineering team and do all the other things. And then at the same time, we were having DrupalCon Europe that was actually losing money. So it did make a lot of sense why they had to just say like, hey, let's reinvent that model, which was then done. And I was part of that process as well, where we said like, let's just create a franchise model, like where we say like, we find an organizer in the continent that we are going to be doing DrupalCon. So that was like one of the first things that I probably started to work on together back then with Megan Saneke and the team, DA back then. So then fast forward, like, then Megan moved to another role, then I was part of finding the new executive director. Then of course, like she was there during COVID, like everything changed because finally we became a financially sustainable organization in 2019, and we had like these big things that we wanted to do, and we met in 2020 in March in Atlanta. And the goal was that the board would come together and like finally we figured out how we can go forward, and let's now make a new strategy for the next 3 years. And then we were in Atlanta on the 8th of March 2020. Where basically we got a phone call like, COVID is happening, DrupalCon is supposed to happen in 2 months from now. We have to just move everything into a fixing mode. So like that, then going out of COVID, luckily being really lucky to have so awesome community and organizations that helped us through that, which basically just like gave us donated, or like we're part of saying like we're still going to be sponsors even though the conference is not going to happen in person and all that stuff. So shout out to all the great sponsors who participated and said like, hey, we still want this all to happen. To finally on my 5th year, again, executive director moving to another position, we going through try to find a new CEO. And then with that person now for the last year, we've been like, yes, let's now, get, we are back on the track what we were in 2019, because we just had to change everything in these years. And yet again here, just to make that clear, the board of directors, we just set the strategy, and we have an amazing team of like, depending how like I think 15 to 17 people who are doing the work.
Yeah.
And so, as a board member, you participate, you guide, you help, you bring your knowledge, and you help where you can. But of course, like the team is the ones that are doing the magic,
And so 6 years, as you just illustrated, you've seen quite a bit, right? You've gone through quite a lot with the Drupal Association Board. Just out of curiosity, out of those 6 years, how many of those years were you chair of the board? Was it 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, so that's also like interesting because Dries was always the chair. Until at a certain point, there was made a decision to for the first time, Adam Goodman, who's a professor in Northwestern in Chicago, he was then appointed the chair to come and like shape a little bit like how a board works, because he has all that knowledge. So so Adam came in and was the chair of the Drupal Association. And back then it was probably never even thought of like that, the idea never crossed, I think, back then, like to give that to actually somebody in the board. And but we evaluate, like we grew into a place with the board where we said like, hey, let's just now start to like have it as a running position. So Audra, who was part of the board, she was then the first board member, like that was after Adam. And then the idea was that she would be for 1.5 years, then I would come in, be for my 1.5 years, and now Owen is in the board, and then we would have like a healthy transition between the years and a little bit of like different people doing that role.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that allows for new ideas and different perspectives, right? I'm wondering though, let's take a quick step back, right? So we talked about kind of your tenure at the Drupal, on the Drupal Association Board. I'm more curious, like, what does the Drupal Association Board do, right? So like everybody hears about the board, everybody knows the board supports Drupal and supports the community, but like, what do you guys do?
We certainly probably do not do what many people think that we do. It's like having some secret meetings and like, so that was also one of the things that I was pushing through again, is like, let's try to be more transparent and open. It is not that we are talking about things that are not being able to talk about in the open. It's more of a, like, let's open it all up, open up our board meetings again and all this stuff. Like there's no reason to have this anything in any closed rooms. So what do we do? I think one of the things, when the previous executive director quit, the board, for example, needs to find a new person to do that role.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like one of the things that we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to have a search committee. We need to like figure out how we find like the person, interviews. Of course, you can pay a lot of money for a company to do it, or you decide like that maybe you do it yourself. So I've been part of this process now 2 times. And this is one of the things. And then, of course, when we then are in a position of a chair, like, I do like the CEO reports to the chair then.
Mm-hmm.
And the board. So like, that's like one of the things that we have to like,
So
we have to sign documents sometimes, or
yeah. So this might be an extremely unpopular, comparison, right? But it very much sounds like it works like a regular, air quotes, regular company, right? Where
correct.
CEO runs the company. So the executive director of the Drupal Association runs the Drupal Association, runs all of their activities, and then that person reports to the board, and then the board is basically an advisory committee to help define strategic initiatives and help advise.
100%. And that's exactly the things that we do. So we set the strategy for the next 3 years.
Yep.
And 3 to 5 years, depending on. And of course, when things then change, example, we had a strategy in 2019 developed. We've been like,
oh dear,
and then of course, like something changes, and then we have to like then help the staff and guide the CEO and to just what to do next. So 100% how you say it, John. And not to forget, Drupal Association is an like it's an entity. It's a legal entity too.
Yeah.
So there are certain regulations that we have to fulfill. We have to do I'm not from the United States, but I've been learning this in the last 6 years, like the 990 tax filings.
Oh yeah.
Which we then have to every second year or something like sign off. We have to do audits. We have to do all this formal stuff. And in my past 1.5 years as a chair, I probably spent 25% of my time working for the Drupal Association Board.
Oh, wow.
So this is not a, well, like I said, like it's not that we just come together and like think about the next, there's a lot of organizational things that we have to do, follow up on things. There's, but the fun stuff to set the strategy, that's certainly like a lot of fun things.
To kind of extend John's, description, it's like a lot of other companies, like the board can be as involved as they want, right? The board's never going to run the company other than when there is no current CEO, right? You're going to help make sure, probably do more work when there is no CEO, but, the board can be as involved as they want, and the community has people that care about the community and the association. So the people that are on the board are probably going to be more involved in setting that strategy and trying to, future-proof the association and, everything that it provides. I think that makes a lot of sense. And Just an aside, John, that is not where I thought you were going to go when you said there was a controversial opinion. I was like, oh God, what's he going to say now? Because
Well,
I mean, it's a nonprofit organization with a board of directors.
I know, but like, you know, when you make that sort of comparison, people are automatically like, oh, now he's comparing the Drupal Association to, like, you know, a major corporate conglomerate, and you know, it's.
And which is really interesting. Like when I love having that conversation, because we have to talk about that a little bit more, so people understand also like what it is that the Drupal Association does, and what the board does, and what the staff does, and what we definitely do not do. You know, and I think that I think that's like, you know, on one hand, most of us come into the Drupal Association from local associations, from some kind of a local, event organizers. Many of us are like, you know, we were running camps, or we're doing like something locally that like brings us, you know, that we, you know, start doing this. And they're, you know, organizing dev days, you know, like the people who are just in the committee there, they just organize, you know, do everything and make all decisions. You know, so often when we come, or the new people come into the board, they're used to being like part of these community-driven events.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like they, of course, like they maybe the different opinion, like different thinking of, you know, that they need to be much more hands-on. But that's of course different here. We have people who are the staff, and sometimes the board needs to also protect the staff.
Yeah.
You know, there's also certain things, you know, they have things that they want to do and need to do, you know, and depending on the strategy. And also sometimes it is our job to stand up and say like, hey, they are doing their job and they are doing it well, and they are trying to do that at the best, you know, and then sometimes we are in that role, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. And I think, you know, some of the things that on the tech side that the Drupal Association has been doing is great. Like the switch over to GitLab has been fantastic. The merge request. I mean, there's been some bumps, and I'm sure there's been some pushback from certain developers that are used to doing things the way that they're used to doing things. But I think it's great that the association board kind of stands behind them and helps support that, because it's been really good. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. Let's talk about life after Drupal 7 end of life. Since August 2023, a large topic of conversation has been around the announcement of Drupal 7's official end of life in January of 2025. It's no secret that many companies, organizations, and individuals are still on Drupal 7 and have yet to migrate. I think we can all agree that migration, while beneficial, is not always feasible in certain situations, and this is where Hero Devs comes in. Hero Devs has partnered with a core team of maintainers of Drupal 7 to build and maintain the Drupal 7 never-ending support product, ensuring the same quality of support that you have come to expect over the years. Drupal 7's never-ending support, or NES, allows for an effortless transition, around 5 minutes, to switch over, allowing your site to remain secure, compliant, and compatible after Drupal 7 goes end of life. This allows you to migrate on your own time or not at all. Hero Devs promises to keep D7 alive and well, even offering support for the current top 100 Drupal 7 modules. If you'd like to know more about Drupal 7's never-ending support, visit herodevs.com. That's HERODEVS.com.
We've talked a lot about like kind of how you got started, and you've kind of been circling around like some of the things that the board does and how it operates. And it's not some evil corporation, but obviously it does follow certain nonprofit corporate structures. But like specifically, I'm kind of curious if we could dig in a little bit into like not just the what, but like the how. Like, how does the board operate? Like, I know you've mentioned there's like the 1.5 year for the chair, but the term limits for their seats. Like, structurally, how does it kind of work and operate, and how do you guys get together and things like that?
Yeah, so good question. So we have 2 community elected members who have 2-year terms, and so every year they always there comes in a new person who's community elected. Yeah, so every second year there's a community elected member coming in, and then there is a at large. I don't remember the exact term, but then there is like the other ones that are actually nominated by the nomination or nominee committee. So there's a group of people in the board who then do go through a process of like trying to find out what are we missing, what skills are we missing, how can we have a board that like represent different parts of our community, having an end user and and having contributors, having agency owners, maybe people working in the agencies, like having the freelancer, whoever is like needed maybe at that point. So we try to get in, and that's a 3-year term, and you can do maximum 2 of those. So the 3-year term, I did 2 of those terms, and then therefore I had to quit. Like the bylaws did not allow me to be any longer as a board member. And how we do it, we meet twice per year in person. So twice per year, it's always the weekend before DrupalCon. We meet for 2 days where we try to just come together. And often we have like the new people who had been like recently, coming into the board, maybe 2 to 3 new people every year. And then there's a community elected. And then we just try to get them a little bit on top of like what we are doing. We get an update from the leadership team at the DA, like what they're doing, the green lights and the yellow and the reds of like, you talked about the GitLab migration earlier. How is it going? Do they need anything? Do we need to do fundraising to get some stuff done? Or are we applying for some grants and all this stuff that we just talk about and we try to like shape our work? So this is done twice per year. Apart from that, we do official board meetings once per quarter. And those are mainly to approve something. Or let's say if we need to, if we are going to approve a new strategy for the next 3 to 5 years, that needs to go through an approval process, or if we're approving budgets. So there's always once per year the budget for next year. So that's going to be there's a board meeting now on tomorrow. And there's going to be an approval and discussions about the budget for next year. And how this is then being done is in working groups. So we have the finance committee, who is then meeting regularly with the financial, like the CFO or whoever is doing that role at the DA, and going through everything. Is everything up? Is the cash flow okay? Are we having the reserves? Are we paying everything? All these things that you need to do when you're running an organization. So we have the nominee committee, we have the finance committee, and then depending on what we're doing, we do different type of committees or working groups that we either are only board members, or we try to and by the way, there's always a staff person involved. And then we often invite people from the community to be part of those. For example, in one of the new strategic initiatives, which is marketing for Drupal, obviously we have to have representation of the Promote Drupal. So Suzanne is part of that. And also like potentially other people who are then coming in and like looking at the work that we are trying to do, which is then most of the time done, of course, by the staff then in the end.
So I'm curious. It sounds like you mentioned it wasn't until a few years ago that you thought to pull somebody from outside of Drupal onto the board, and that kind of helped you figure out the mechanics of the boards in general, I think. But when you're looking for somebody like the at-large positions, are you always looking at only like Drupal community people, or are you sometimes looking at other industries as well?
Yeah, so certainly often. So we are lucky that we have someone like Nick in our board now, Nick Wienhoff, who is of course like a contributor and community member or event organizer and local association president, and he checks all the boxes of that. But he's now working for GitLab, and having that expertise in the board of like connecting, be more connected to GitLab and like understanding what they're doing and like help that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So apart from that, we were lucky there that we got like to check all the boxes for someone like Nick. But we had like Mike Lamb from Pfizer. He was in the board for some time. Steve Francia from Google, or he was at Google. So, and he has like Steve Francia, who is then the author of very many open source projects and was leading the Go project. Having somebody like him, of course, in the board, where he was often telling us like, hey, I love like if I could manage to create like such a great community, and how do you all do that? And we are constantly, like I know, and hearing that from somebody, like he said, like how can you bring together so many developers and 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 organizations to and he talked about it in a keynote at DrupalCon at some point, where he gave like where he was also just inspired by the Drupal Association, or the Drupal project, sorry, the Drupal community.
Oh.
So we try to tick those boxes depending on where we're going. So for example, now we knew that marketing would be a big thing that we want to work on. So we've been trying to get expertise from that area as well. So Lynn Kaposi, the former CMO of Acquia, she's gone through that process before. She's been marketing, going through big marketing plans and all this stuff. So she knows how to do that. So therefore we decided it was good to ask her if she wanted to be part of the board.
Okay. And to dig in a little bit deeper, like you mentioned, there's a few different positions. The community appointed ones, I think most people are aware of, but just in case you aren't, the community can, or people can nominate themselves. I assume people can't nominate other people for the board. And then the community gets a chance to vote and decide who's going to represent the community on the board. But for the other at-large members, or the other members that get selected to the board, how does that process go once you've kind of narrowed down the pool? Do you just like talk to the group and find out who's interested? Is there?
Yeah, that's how you do it. Yeah, so when you have identified, so first, there's a big matrix that we have of like, we want to have representation from different continents. We want to have different representation from different type of community members, being an end user, agency, and so on. Like there's so many criteria that we want to just go through. And then we look at, for example, what do we have today? How will that change? So for example, I went out of the board now, Ryan in Commerce, or Centaro, and Mike Herschel. And like all three of us like are very involved in the community itself, like also in the Drupal project. And so we just basically lost from the board like that expertise, that connection. We still have it, luckily. And then you look at it and you say like, okay, maybe we have to make sure or see if we can strengthen that part, or is it maybe not needed now because we have something else?
Yeah. I think that's correct.
So when we have the names, then we basically call up people and say like, okay, we are thinking about, that your expertise would be, needed, or are you willing to do it? And you have to also commit a little bit of time because, probably once per week or every second week, you're doing some kind of meetings and discussing things and helping out. And so you have to commit and you have to be willing to do that. And up to the tier role that, like I said, spends probably at least 25% of their time on that.
Wow.
Yeah, depending on what's going on.
It's interesting. I'd like to reframe the way that you said you parted ways with the board, right? You said you quit, and I feel like you didn't really quit, like, right? You retired. We'll say you retired from the board.
Even worse.
Right? Is it? I don't know.
I'm 43 years old.
You can retire but still be involved. When you quit, it sounds like you were like, I'm all done with this. Forget it. And you're still very much involved in the community and very much supporting it. So
yeah, totally. And that was my like sad, like, thank you, Baddý, and giving me flowers and everything in DrupalCon Lille. And I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be continuing working with your working groups. I'm still like a past chair, part of the executive committee that decides like on the agenda and does all that. Like, I just don't have a vote anymore.
They gave you flowers and then deactivated your Drupal.org account / accounts. Like, so you that's interesting. So let's dive into that real quick, right? So you said you don't have a vote anymore. So as an advisory member, you don't have a board vote. As a board member, you do have a board vote, right? So that's the difference there. Interesting. All right. Well, I'm glad we talked about that, because I know that you're still very much involved. So as being a former board member, we're going to talk kind of about some strategic initiatives, and these initiatives really kind of kicked off over the last year, right? So these are ongoing initiatives, but they were started in the past year. Can you tell us a little bit more? We've kind of gone into each of them at a surface level, but can you tell us a little bit more about them, kind of individually and in a little more detail?
Yeah, so it's simple. So we were lucky. We were lucky that when finally everything stabilized a little bit better after the COVID situation, that that we had also an opportunity to hire a new CEO, which then could lead us and help us with the things that we were renewing. You know, like so it went well together. Not saying that a previous CEO could have done that with us, but I'm just saying like we could also then search for the CEO that we wanted to have to make maybe potentially a small transition or start to think differently. So when we were looking for a CEO, we had already in mind that we wanted to focus on 3 things. And that does not mean, to be very clear, it does not mean that we're going to stop focusing on everything else. It still doesn't mean that we are not, be doing the things that we're doing, but we are going to focus on helping the Drupal project to innovate and supporting it to innovate. So one of the first things, that was the first initiative. One of the first things we did, we set up the Pittsburgh competition, where we said like, okay, can we now in our authority here get companies to put money together to see if there's something cool happening in the Drupal world that needs support? Because there's not companies behind those people or ideas. So can we become like some kind of because think about it like this, the Drupal Association has an amazing connection towards the organizations. So the organizations are supporting partners, they are Drupal certified partners, they are already like sponsors of DrupalCon, but we haven't really like figured out how we can actually help those companies also to support innovation in Drupal. And that is a thing that we've been saying, like, let's start looking at that, start looking at how can we move things faster in the, by, for example, say, okay, if there's strategic initiatives, can we like help funding them? Can we help organizing them? Get a little bit closer. Like who might think in the future, maybe there's a core committer at the DA. I don't know. Like, I'm not saying that it is the plan now, but why not? Why is there not like people part of the release management or people part of like the security team or something like that, not also part of the DA, and because you have all these companies that wanna support the modules and all the stuff, but you have to be pretty much in the community to understand and how that is being done. Like, all this, we know each other, we meet each other every time on DrupalCon. If you're a new company, how can I be part of like core? How can I be part of making something happen? Like if I don't know Jacob Rogovich, how can I then help in web forms? I need to, of course, he's open if anybody writes him and comes on the Slack and all this stuff, but like, maybe that's not so easy for companies. So that's number one, the innovation part. How can we help Drupal to innovate faster? Because we need that. We need to, our project needs to constantly innovate, and not just innovate, but we also need to make sure that our base and our core and everything is just like always up to date. And if there's lack of funding there, if there's people suddenly not working for the companies that are supporting them before, but very crucial in our core, maybe we can step in there. Should we maybe think about that? Is there a way? So this is one of the things. Like it's a big topic. It's probably a whole episode. And trust me, we haven't figured out how that is all being done. But one of the things that we started with was a Pittsburgh competition, and we are now helping each of those projects that got funding to actually do the thing. So we are a little bit product managing them. Let's say Alex at the DA is like having regular updates, and he's reporting on like how is it going, because we are basically giving them the funds to do things.
Yeah.
Did you see well, it was it was affectionately called Pittsburgh because we were in Pittsburgh, but do you see that becoming a regular part of DrupalCons or a regular way to kind of spur innovation going forward?
Yes. So what we hear, so the companies, the organizations, and now I'm not talking about the top contributors because they know how to do it. They have people like you working for them and who are doing this, but the other 80 companies, they constantly come and say like, hey, we want to contribute. Where should we contribute? Where does the contribution, where is contribution needed? And I would love that then the DA can like guide them and say, hey, go and talk to let's say, go and talk to Lullabot regarding the admin UI. They are already involved in that together with Acquia and 1x, and speak to Baddý. Maybe she will maybe know from, and then she will connect your developers or your country. Like, so the DA has a little bit this relationship that can bring this stuff all together, right?
I feel like one of the big things that maybe the DA could help with is, with contribution, one of the big things the project is missing is project managers, like technical project managers. And we had a show a few weeks ago with Stephen Musgrave, and he kind of started the needs review issue queue. I'm still blown away by the amount of unclogging he did and the amount of help that he's providing to the community, just because he's unblocking so many core committers and just reviewing stuff in the first place. And if we had more people like him and could spread some of that to maybe the top modules or like maybe audit modules occasionally, just having a technical project manager that can make sure an issue is written correctly, make sure it's in the right status, tag it with a couple of things so that these types of, because there's different tiers of companies. There's, the big hitters, then there's the medium companies that maybe have a couple developers that they can assign 10 hours a month. It's hard. I mean, it's hard for those companies to project manage themselves, but if there's just a queue they can go to and knock stuff out.
So I know. So listen to this. That's one of the things. I registered to Drupal.org in 2007, I think.
Okay.
So from 2007 until 2013, I first went to my first camp. and if you think about it, what was the time for me until my first contribution happened? Is anyone measuring this? We have the data.
Right.
And what are now GitHub and Co. and what are they all doing when you register there? There's automatic messages coming hey, thank you. Hey, do you not want to review? No, you were the last one to comment on this thread. There's all kinds of processes where we are helping with the contribution. We are enabling the contributors, and just let's talk about something very simple as an onboarding on Drupal.org. What is your onboarding process?
Mm-hmm.
So I go on Drupal.org today, and everyone is like, cool, you need to be confirmed. That's very clear that you're new. Nice. But from there on, you're a little bit lost.
Well, even me, I joined Drupal.org in 2008. I learned 2 months ago that you need a completely separate role to opt into security releases on Drupal.org, and that there's a whole application process. Now, I got through it, but it took me 15 years to learn about that.
Yeah. So what's the time from user registration to your first issue comment? What's the time from the how long are we actually getting issues through? What is this time and all this stuff? How can we understand our process better?
Yeah.
And how can we then help maybe with some of the things? And there, the Drupal Association engineering team with the GitLab stuff, we are already doing a lot of those things, helping with a little bit of automation. But there's so much more we can do. And this is all part of this first strategic initiative to say, let's focus on this. Let's make sure that we enable our community to be better in contribution and to innovate and help us to make sure that Drupal becomes and continues to be relevant.
Yeah.
So
Nick,
sorry.
Go ahead, Baddý.
No, that just goes into the next strategic initiative. So
yeah, so I was gonna say I just like Nick's nod to the non-code contribution as he knows that's a hot button one for me. Non-code contribution, definitely important, definitely necessary. So Baddý, continue. The next initiative is marketing, right?
Yeah, marketing. So now comes the next thing. We are already doing amazing things. We have a top-notch project running on really strong technology stack, and we are already doing amazing job, and we are out there. We are creating, I don't know, the OpenAI module came 2 months after the big hype where everything was in the news. It was already there, and we can continue talking about where we have been in the pioneering things in the CMS world. There's this one thing that is missing is we are not really good talking about it. And so we realized that we have just been in the past, because the DA has not focused on that. So it has been a little bit, it's like, hey, community, you just do that in your capacity. Each of the companies are out there talking about Drupal, but most of the time they're probably talking about themselves. So there's not really much like, we are not talking about Drupal a lot as a DA. We are doing DrupalCon and we are like creating all kinds of channels. So marketing was the next thing, because there's a hard competition out there. The competition is getting stronger on the CMS market, for example.
Yeah.
And we already are there. We already have, of the top thousands of websites, we already have 5% running on Drupal.
Yeah.
But nobody's out there talking about Drupal. And on the contrary, the big ones are actually talking bad, if they can, about Drupal, because they want to take over. And that's being seen in Australia, like where Adobe is just having campaigns talking about, why Adobe is then better, So we need to start talking about Drupal. And there we have a marketing plan to be done. And we've been having some extra funds. So the board has extra funds to allocate, and we've been then hiring or getting consultants in to actually work on a marketing plan for Drupal as a project. And now we can talk about so towards whom? Well, on one hand, to talk about the Drupal to the end user, the people who are selecting Drupal, but also we have to take care of the young developers.
Yes.
The future contributors, the future founders of Drupal agencies. So there's all things we need to figure out there. We are doing a marketing plan. And one of the first things we did was to go to the Web Summit. So the Web Summit in Lisbon, 70,000 people.
Oh my God.
And we called up a couple of companies that are supporting partners and Drupal certified partners at the Drupal Association. And we basically said, are you willing to be part of a project where we basically buy a booth? And this time it was Acquia, 1x Internet, FFW, and Phase 2. And we bought a booth, big booth. So the cost was just only organizational effort on the DA side. But this team came together. We had this huge booth with a little bit of a new brand, because the Promote Drupal initiative that we are also working very close with, they are also thinking about new colors for Drupal, new exciting look, a little bit more fresh, throwing in some colors. And I hope that you all saw the booth. You can also look at I think Dries tweeted or blogged about that. And so we went to the Web Summit for one whole week, and the booth was just Drupal. We went to the Web Summit and we met these 70,000 people. And we were also lucky to get a keynote. So I was lucky. I was lucky that Dries couldn't come, because then I could go on stage. Because he had a parallel event in the United States. So we were speaking there on the full stack stage, more than 1,000 people talking about Drupal.
Wow.
And the booth was amazing and looked fresh, looked good, and people came by, and either we heard, Drupal? Is that still existing? I remember Drupal back in the days. It's and what is new in Drupal? Then we heard the people that came and said actually hey, cool, Drupal, I use Drupal, or there were even people that came and said hey, we are evaluating now Drupal against Sidecore. And then there were the young people that just did not have a clue. Hey, what is this cool thing? What is this new? Wow. And then we showed them, and we demoed Drupal for the younger developers, and they were cool, yeah, let's try it out. Yeah, awesome. Is it Symfony? Hey, cool. Wow, they thought it was exciting.
This initiative is super exciting to me. And simply because I think you just highlighted it as you were describing it, right? We want to grow community, right? We want to grow talent, but we also need to compete. And a lot of people that are out there that are decision makers, they're looking at Sitecore, they're looking at Adobe, and Drupal doesn't even have a seat at the table. Sadly, it saddens me to say that, but it's the reality, right?
Yeah.
So I think this initiative and being there and being able to be at at Web Summit to say hey, there's 70,000 people here, and have those conversations is super energizing and super positive. It's a positive
Yeah.
step forward. So much so that it actually motivated me to submit a talk to a non-Drupal conference.
Yes.
So
Nice.
I submitted a talk to the Open Source Summit North America, which is
Very
happening
cool.
in April. So
Cool.
again,
Amazing.
my talk is going to be on non-code contribution.
I-
So super excited. Go ahead, Nick.
I think people underestimate like name recognition, because the thing is right now, for Drupal to be in the conversation, either the company has to think about Drupal, and in that case, they're generally going to be going to Drupal agencies, which would have probably
Mhm.
pushed Drupal anyway, or they happen to have to select a Drupal agency who's going to introduce them to it. And when you have a kind of neutral third party, the Drupal Association, kind of promoting Drupal itself, that kind of solves the problem that John was saying, where they might not even be working with a Drupal company, but if they say, hey, what about Drupal? And if companies that don't traditionally work with Drupal hear what about Drupal enough,
Yeah.
they'll eventually get a project where they'll do it and realize how good it is and start using it and offering it themselves. Like most companies, especially larger companies working with larger clients, if the client says, what about Drupal? I want to use Drupal, whether the company knows about it or not, the agency knows about Drupal or not, they're going to use it.
Yeah,
So we
that's-
need to go to we need to go to two type of conferences. And just to be said, like this is just one part of the marketing initiatives. Like there's more to come. So if you think about it, we need to be at SymphonyCon, we need to be at the
Yeah.
React Cons, we need to be at VR Developers, we need to be at the Web Summit. But then we also need to go and the open source conferences that John is going to. But then we also need to be at the events where the end users are, where the decision makers are, which are like
right.
not necessarily like a tech conferences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More the marketing conferences
Business
and the services conferences, right? To be able to say like, hey, yes, Drupal is a competitor to Adobe and Sitecore and these other services. Cause like what ends up happening is, like I said, Drupal doesn't necessarily have a seat at the table, or the opposite thing is somebody used Drupal 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and they had a bad experience and they're like, nope, not going to use that thing. They have to Drupal has to be able to present its value proposition of like, hey, Drupal's open source. There are thousands of developers across the world. And at the end of the day, you're not, it could potentially be cheaper than that big expensive solution that you're paying licensing fees for and not getting any value out of. Conversations that I have around those things are, very much like I was talking to somebody the other day about Contentful, right? And like, I'm like, yeah, Contentful is great. It's relatively inexpensive, but it's very out of the box. And you pay, Drupal has modules. Contentful has a similar premise, but you pay per module that you add, or you pay per field, or per content type, right? So like, there's cost to there, and it can be exponential in some cases.
Yeah, I spent a number of years as a solutions architect helping to sell free software, i.e. Drupal, which is an interesting proposition. And it was always very interesting to me because I was in those conversations about Drupal versus Adobe versus Sitecore. And majority of the time, the only reason Drupal was there was because of like Gartner, Forrester, whatever. Like they did, but no one had heard of it. So that I spent a lot of time educating. But if you think about it, that's why this is so important for DA to do, because everyone who's involved in delivery, whether it's a freelancer or it's an agency or even an internal team at a university or a company or whatever, they have their own, when it comes to marketing, they have their own job to do. They got to sell themselves, right? So 1X, if you're doing a project, you got to sell yourself and your service. And Drupal is a tool that you use and your experts there. But without, that's a problem with open source, right? Without some central authority who's able to market the project, Adobe is selling AEM all the time. Sitecore is selling Sitecore all the time. Contentful is selling Contentful all the time.
Yes.
But, most people can't afford to, quote unquote, sell free software, sell Drupal, because they got to sell their own services on top of it.
Yes.
So we need somebody, i.e. the DA, to do this.
And you know what? Like, this is so spot on. And basically, you just did my talk now at the Web Summit. Happy to share my slides.
Feel free to just play a video,
Yeah, and I think like exactly this, like, we are already there. We are innovative. We are very many times like even much better technology than any of the other ones that you mentioned. The thing is like, because we are a decentralized project,
right?
We are not owned by one company that then like actually puts in billions of dollars to just do things. That has been like a little bit, working up to a certain point, but not 100%.
Better for me is subjective, right? Like I like better. Like I think like instead of saying like we're better, right? I think it's like we need to say we're more flexible, more configurable, more customizable, right? Because like I don't know, somebody could say like blue is better than green, right? It's all a matter of opinion. But I think when you bring it down to the facts and what you can do, right? Other, and I'm not going to name them again, but like other CMSs, right, are like a black box that you get what you get and you don't get upset, right? With Drupal, you have flexibility, you have customization, customizability. That's not a word, but we're going to pretend like it is. You have modules and you have an ecosystem of developers. Again, I was talking to somebody the other day on our sales team. And I was like, listen, this is probably, again, not very popular statement, especially to talking to your sales team, but like one of the biggest benefits here is there are thousands of people that are working in Drupal, hundreds of companies that are working in Drupal. If you get upset at us, it's open source. You can go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right. Like
we have to
you do not have vendor lock-in whatsoever. You don't even have developer lock-in. If you don't like your developer, you can go find another developer. Right. So, I think, marketing message is huge. I'm happy to see that, the DA is doing it. But I think initiative number 3 is also a very important one, right?
Important.
Key. Because now we have like all these plans and I'm excited that you are excited about them. And that's actually, by the way, the feedback that we've been getting on the DrupalCon now in Lille and then in Pittsburgh. We were having these open board conversations about this and like everybody, I feel like everyone is really excited. So now comes the third part, which is fundraising. How are we in the heck going to be doing this? Because companies that are also, willing to put in money in something, like they often want to get then something instead, like leads or whatever I can get, So maybe there is a way for us as being like such a decentralized project with the open web as like being recognized as a public digital good. We are an open source project that has like all the stamps. So why are we not out there, or before? Why were we not out there trying to get grants from the like talking about different words, difficult words, John? Philanthropic. Yeah. So how can we get into that? How can we get to apply for grants? And by the way, as soon as we started to talk about this more, and we also like the DA hired a director of philanthropy at the DA. So we are already started to think like, how can we have this thing that we are doing something for the better good too? And there's actually people out there that are willing to invest in those projects.
Yeah.
And we've just gotten recently a grant of a couple of €100,000 of like finalizing things and with the GitLab migration and stuff like this. You have to create some projects. You have to like apply for grants. You have to apply for funding. And also we have to continue having strong relationship with the ecosystem that we have.
It's a ton of work.
So the fundraising part, we have not been successful because in the past we've been good in doing DrupalCon, which has been a big fundraiser. And then we've been doing, and by the way, maybe I'm using the wrong words, because I'm when you're talking about non-profit organizations, there's also like these words that you should use in the US and stuff like this. So maybe I'm sometimes using the wrong words, but for me, it is this like getting money in and getting things to be done.
Yeah.
I see that as one of the advantages of the Drupal Association being a nonprofit, right? Like you said, there's organizations that will give to a philanthropic organization or cause, but they're not going to give that money to one of the agencies that works on Drupal just because like, oh, you work on Drupal. No, but because they don't have the accountability, they don't have the ability to audit it, they don't have the nonprofit tax write-off. Yeah, all that stuff. But the Drupal Association does that, and the other benefit other than it being a nonprofit is that they do have representation of the community, so the community has some say in how that's spent as well. And you can certainly, I mean, the types of things that, I mean, individual companies have done things that have really helped the community, but it's significantly in certain ways. But it's only the Drupal Association that I think can truly do things at an infrastructure level, or at a marketing level that really the amount of changes you can affect. You can see where that gap is that the community isn't filling, and if you're getting funding for that, then that makes it possible, right?
And there's a lot of those projects, and like being ambassador projects for universities or underrepresented groups, or you can go in so many areas where we can like be fulfilling our nonprofit goal, and then we are also at the same time like I don't know, like this is the third thing that is probably the most difficult part, because all the other one is like all these ideas and let's just do it, but we need to find then ways of how to finance and fund those.
Right. It's interesting because I'm suddenly struck. A lot of times when we talk about like large organizations, we think about it like like Alphabet, right? It's an umbrella, right? But because we're decentralized, and because we're open source, and because it's everyone freely gives, it's actually, the DA is not really an umbrella, it's more of that foundation. And the bigger we can make that foundation, the cooler, taller, more amazing things we can build. But that's an interesting kind of way of flipping that around, this dichotomy between the profit-driven proprietary system versus an open source free one. It's a really special thing.
It's fun. It's interesting as we're talking, and as I'm looking at these initiatives, like packaging these up, and these three initiatives to me are like ensuring the future of Drupal, or propelling Drupal into the future, right? Because 1 and 2, innovation and marketing are important, and obviously like 3 is what enables 1 and 2, right? But all 3 of them together are going to, as you said, Ron, increase that foundation, build that footprint, so that Drupal is a contender, and by nature or as a side effect, I don't know, whichever you prefer, but like that's going to allow for more developer growth, a larger ecosystem, and hopefully a better community. I mean, I think it's going to lead to a better community. So I definitely think those are smart initiatives and very needed.
So in the interest of time, like I know that we've had this amazing conversation. We're getting close to the end of it. It's always about the other stuff. It's always about Drupal. It's about the community. It's about the association. But we're talking to Baddý, and what about you? Like, okay, you've put your time in, and you've served. You've been chairperson. You've spent 25% of your time. You're still serving now, but now that you're not officially on the board, like, kind of what are you going to do with hopefully a little bit more of that time for yourself and your plans?
Yeah, so I continue running the 1X company, where we just turned 10. Woohoo! Nice. We are almost 100 people. Wow, and we are just building like a lot of awesome Drupal projects and everything related. So like that's of course like always just apart from being also taking care of, like with my husband, of the 2 kids and just living life, right? So what I'm really excited about is that obviously, I'm doing a lot on the local community as well here in Germany, and we are also assisting a lot in Spain. By the way, DrupalCon next year in Europe is going to be in Barcelona. Just a little ad here to everyone that hasn't booked their trip yet. So what I get excited about is, like, for example, the Web Summit thing that I talked about. Now we've done it once. We know exactly how to do it now. We know how to go, what to present, how to talk about it. And I would love now to be part of the people who are now going to be figuring out how we can roll that out as a program. So
Yeah.
there's maybe, certified Drupal Association companies who then can go to conferences, and then they can get other, so how can we roll this out so we can go to the at least 4 events in 2024? I want to be at SymphonyCon. I think that we've already started a conversation with the people from SymphonyCon. They actually wanted us to be last week in Brussels, but that was just too short. But they've already invited us to come to SymphonyCon next year. Maybe we can do even something more. Like, how can we? So for me, I get really excited now that I don't have to be doing maybe more of the organizational things.
Yeah.
That I can dive into maybe some of this work and help with that. So that's where I get really excited. And then also in general, just continuing in contribution in all different ways, most of the time, just event organization, dev days next year, and so on.
So just to sum it up, basically, you've given so much time and energy and service to the community, and now that kind of you're able to take a step back, you're going to take that time and energy to turn around and give more time and energy and service back to the community again. Seems like it's just who you are and what you do. It's just now you're going to have a little bit more freedom to focus on those things that are really inspiring you right now.
Yeah, totally. And before, I always enjoyed every single minute, even though some of the things are pretty hard when there comes up crisis, where there comes up difficult conversations.
Sure.
Or pressure from community members for certain things that are being done and stuff like this. It's not easy. And that eats up sometimes a lot of the time. And I think being now able to just focus maybe even more on just certain, going in the deep diving on the things I'm always part of the DrupalCon Europe organization team. So I'm there in the advisory board together with Gabor and Imre and others from the community. We are doing Barcelona. That's so much fun. We did Lille last year, and now we're just going on a tour with our little mascot. And we are organizing Splash Awards here in Germany. It's going to happen in Berlin, and we are organizing Dev Days in Bulgaria next summer.
Oh wow!
And this is all the non-code contribution, and everyone who wants to be part of it. And I encourage everyone out there in the community, if you feel that you think that things can be done better or different or something like that, please come and join us and help us, because that's what we mainly need. We need people, and we've been pretty successful now in Germany, for example, to get new people involved, younger people, but we are still not in the speed that I would love to. I would love to see many more new volunteers every year, and you have to look for them. You have to guide them. You have to help them.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been talking a lot about the Drupal Association and community, but as we mentioned, you're also the CEO and co-founder of 1X Internet, and you mentioned you're almost at 100 employees. I'm curious, what kinds of things are you thinking about leading a Drupal organization like that as well? What kinds of things are you looking forward to in the future?
So there's a lot to do, right? So our focus at the moment at my company is that we've been working on our Drupal, try Drupal, we wanna start with a Drupal installation when we start projects, and we want to start with something that is already, using things, and not just always start from scratch. Or, we wanna create a company of best practices. And if I can make a small ad, if you go to 1xinternet.de/try-Drupal, or you just go on our website, maybe you can add a link somewhere, you can actually go and get an instance of how we think that Drupal should look like when you start with Drupal.
That's so cool.
And it also has a design system with it, with web components. It also has a kick-ass search, which is using the decoupled search module that we've been working on, which is a React app.
Okay.
There's a lot of innovation that our team is working on, and then also, of course, working for our clients that are helping us and making sure that we can do things. But and enabling our team to get really good in certain things. That would maybe be the goal for us, and continue just to build awesome Drupal projects.
And you guys are doing all Drupal projects?
only.
Only Drupal projects. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So we've been doing everything then related. Like, of course, like a lot of front end work, done in Next or React, and then technology is also in the search and stuff like. But Drupal is always we're not going away from Drupal.
There you go.
Yes.
I like to hear that. I always like to hear that. As we bring the show to a close here, I am interested, and I'm sure everybody else is interested too, but you said you signed up for Drupal.org. I might butcher the dates, in 2007. Was that it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What I want to know is, how did you get started? Like, what made you go to Drupal.org? What made you start using Drupal? Like, were you like, oh, I need a content management system, do a web search? How did it start?
Good question. Me and my two best friends, one of them is my husband, and the other one is the co-founder also of our company. We own it 3 together. We were all developers. We were all like, finished our engineering, computer science degrees. We were working as developers and all this stuff. And this was in the years 2006, 2007, right? How many of us started? And we just thought that this was something cool. This was something like exciting. It was something that, and that's the spark that I get excited about when I am now at the Web Summit trying to talk about Drupal. Is like, how can we find like the adoption that happened in this time, 2006, 2007? Like, how can we create that hype again? How can we actually make us relevant and exciting again? And, so we find the computer scientists who are just developing, and they see like, hey, this can actually enable me so much faster, and I can do things so much faster than I could before.
Right.
That's what we got excited about. And I think that many of you who are listening, and probably all of you here, probably can relate to that. We saw something that was like, hey, I can build something really quickly. I can do it. It's open source. We got excited about that. And I feel like we have a big story there to tell, because we even have, like with Symfony now, the latest version, like we even have a kick-ass technology that we can be developing on. It's not like anything old.
Yeah.
It's actually the opposite. And that's how it was back then too, and did that answer the question? That got me excited about Drupal in 2007.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Yeah, I think that answered the question. I'm always interested to learn how like people kind of like stumbled upon Drupal and like how they got started, because it always feels like a really interesting question.
Exactly. We were trying to build a portal that like was keeping the photos, and because back then like we had like MySpace and co, but we didn't have Dropbox yet, and we had like, so we actually were like thinking about user management and permissions. So we were actually ourselves just like, hey, where can we keep our photos? And then we started to build this thing, and we found like that Drupal was like, wow, this comes with all of these things out of the box. We don't even have to think about that. We can only focus on our client that we want to have for uploading the photos.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
Very cool.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating.
And we basically hacked the core. Like we didn't know that there was like all that stuff. Like, we did everything wrong probably, but it was so cool that like, then we went to our first DrupalCon in 2014 first, then it was like, ooh, but we had figured it out until then.
Well, Baddý, thank you for joining us. This was a fascinating conversation, and I'm really excited about the initiatives as well. So I'm glad we chatted about that.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. And like, again, I think thank you for also inviting us to actually tell those stories, because I don't know how we can tell them more, but most important, if you're out there, you're listening and you want to, join or help or be part of something, I'm on Drupal Slack, always available. Not always, like sometimes I do take vacation. I'm in Europe. We do vacation. and holiday coming up. So, but ping me. I'm always available for anything on Drupal Slack. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. You can learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choose Become a Patron. All right. As we round out the show, Baddý, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
It's for the Europeans, Baddý Sonja, and for the Americans, then Baddý Sonja. Joking. So Baddý Sonja is my handle, and Baddý Sonja at onexinternet.de if you want to send me an email. Like I said, Drupal Slack is just the place where I hang out on probably the most.
And Ron, how about you?
RL Northcutt in most of the places. Not quite as good at Drupal Slack as Baddý, but I do try.
And John, how about you?
You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi, and you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan and SCXVAN.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. Have a good one, everyone.
Awesome. See you next week.